Hi, everyone. My name is Bree, and I am the Community Coordinator for the Gathering for Open Science Hardware, otherwise known as GOSH. And I also was the Election Secretary for the 2021 GOSH election, which was the first ever election in the GOSH community, and it also oversaw the formation of the GOSH Community Council. I wanted to give a short presentation today summarizing the 2021 GOSH election for anyone who might be interested in knowing more about it. So first, let's quickly discuss what GOSH is. And for anyone who may not be familiar with this community, it is called the Gathering for Open Science Hardware, commonly referred to as GOSH, and it is an international community of hardware makers, artists, researchers, and much more, all of whom are dedicated to making open science hardware ubiquitous by 2025. Another aspect of the GOSH community is the GOSH Community Council. And the GOSH Community Council oversees or delegates all tasks, questions, and issues related to the governance of the GOSH community. And they also coordinate the allocation of community funds to activities like regional events and collaborative hardware development programs. All right, a little bit more background on the GOSH elections. So the first GOSH election was held in 2021 and led to the first seated GOSH Community Council. The first GOSH election was overseen by the GOSH Governance Working Group, who was guided by the GOSH Governance Plan, which they actually created. So in the future, elections will now be overseen by the seated GOSH Community Council. And the GOSH Community Council elections are held annually from around April to June. And those who are elected to the council are referred to as community council members. Now, before we get started with a summary of the 2021 election, let's quickly talk about the GOSH Governance Working Group and plan for seating a first GOSH Community Council. So throughout 2020 and 2021, the GOSH Governance Working Group was tasked with creating a governance structure and election process for the GOSH community. With feedback from the broader GOSH community, they created the first GOSH Governance Plan for seating a community council, and they oversaw the 2021 GOSH election. This plan is meant to be a minimum viable governance structure, with the GOSH Community Council responsible for building out more complete governance structures in the future. All right, so now let's start summarizing the 2021 election and the subsequent structure of the GOSH Community Council. So the GOSH Community Council has a maximum of 7 seated candidates and a minimum of 3. The governance working group that created this governance structure noted that the council should be diverse, with a minimum of 4 candidates that are one or more of the following: a woman, trans, or gender nonconforming person, a person of color and or indigenous person, someone who's from a low-income country and or a community in Africa, South America, or Asia, and a person who is a person with one or more disabilities, and or those who are from unaffiliated community-based organizations or non-governmental organizations. The governance working group also specified term limits for those on the council, with GOSH Community Council membership persisting for 2-year terms, with several 1-year terms seated in the first election in order to enable staggering of terms year over year. So for the first election, there were 4 elected candidates with 2-year terms and 3 with 1-year terms. Council members can serve for at most 2 consecutive terms, regardless of term length. Members can also run for re-election after being off the community council for 1 or more terms. In terms of voter and candidate eligibility, those who are active participants in the GOSH community for at least 6 months are eligible to vote and run in the election. And you can find out more information on what constitutes active participation on page 4 of the GOSH Governance Plan. Candidates can either self-nominate themselves or be nominated by someone else to run in the election, and candidates are vetted to make sure they meet the self-identified criteria above. All right, some of the important and necessary roles during the election are the election secretary, who handles the administration of the election, and the independent observer, who works closely with the election secretary to make sure that nothing unethical happens during the election. The platforms that are used in the election include Lime Survey for voter registration and Star Vote for voting. When running in the election, candidates are able to interact with the community however they like, But in this past election, they were required to post a candidate statement on the GOSH forum and at least attend at least one community meeting. But there are two open issues that remain: how to best schedule the community meetings as to maximize inclusion and global participation, as well as ways to support multilingual participation in community meetings in the broader GOSH election. So after the 2021 election, the GOSH Governance Working Group created a list of deferred issues to be passed on to the seated council, who will be responsible for the next election. These issues include a definition of processes by which further changes to the election process can be made, a review of the first community council election and subsequent refinement of the election process, including mechanisms for assuring regional diversity, improving the voting process, as well as overall term limits for individual community members. All other governance build-out tasks, further enhancing GOSH governance processes and practices, included in these tasks would be defining which categories of votes would require simple majority votes and which types of decisions would require a 2/3 majority. Some more of these deferred issues include processes to approve and populate other GOSH working groups, a formalization and management of code of conduct processes, further delineation of interaction, interfaces, and boundaries between the Community Council and the GOSH 501c3 US nonprofit, a design of facilitation pathways to increase youth participation in governance and leadership. It's recommended that elected community council members also revisit the issue of putting a quorum mechanism in place for future elections. I also wanted to share some statistics from the 2021 election. Out of 58 registered voters, about 45 voted, which means that the election had a 78% voter turnout. The registration rate was 26%, and this was based on emails that were sent out to past gathering attendees. 48% of candidates who were nominated by someone else actually accepted their nomination, and we had a nomination rate of 12% based on emails that were sent out to past gathering attendees. And that is everything I had to share with you all today regarding the 2021 election process. Thank you for listening.